I received this FX6 on January 5th, 2021. And since then, I've used it professionally for hundreds of hours on dozens of shoots. The bottom line up front, this is a fantastic camera that has paid for itself several times over. So before we get into my thoughts as one of the OG FX6 users, please enjoy this montage of beautiful footage shot on the FX6 by me and some of my friends who are also FX6 operators. They graciously provided me some of their best shots for this video. My name is Matt. I'm a freelance cinematographer and location sound mixer based in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I spent the last 4 years on retainer with a regional marketing agency, so between that and my normal freelance workload, I've had plenty of opportunity to put the FX6 through its paces and film some really cool stuff in all sorts of conditions. I pre-ordered this FX6 on November 17th, 2020, within seconds of pre-orders going live. My camera is so old that based on serial number alone, this is definitely one of the first units shipped to North America. With that in mind, I felt like I have some perspective to offer on this great camera. This video is not intended to be a review of the FX6. There are already hundreds, if not thousands of those out there, so I'm going to assume that everybody watching this already understands what makes this camera special. But for me, however, there are three standout features that are worth mentioning. The first is the reliability. This is a workhorse. It has been solid from day one from a firmware and hardware perspective, with a couple of caveats on the hardware that I'll talk about here in a little bit. This has been a fantastic camera and works every single time I pull it out of the bag. The second thing that is the killer feature on this, and really is probably tied for first, is the electronic internal variable ND. The ease with which you can nail your exposure with this camera, because that is just right there. There's no screw-in filters on or off. It's just so nice to be able to dial the exposure in with the ND, not worry about any sort of color shift, and just get your shot exactly looking the way you want it. I wish I could take that feature off and put it on every single other one of my cameras. So what a fantastic feature. The third thing is the robust ecosystem around this camera. Obviously, this is pretty minimally rigged right now, but you can rig this camera with anything you want. There's bright tangerine, small HD, or small HD, small rig, Tilta, you name it. There's this huge ecosystem of parts that make this camera super customizable. It's been really easy to change the configuration as my skills and my needs have changed. And that's one of the cool things about it, is you can just make it work for you, and it's super easy to do that. So those are the three things that, in my mind, have made this camera great for me. So all that being said, not everything has been rainbows and puppy dogs with this camera. There are a couple of things that, in my opinion, could stand to be fixed on here. None of which take away from the fact that you get wonderful images out of this camera. It's very easy to use, and it's just a super reliable workhorse. So keep that in mind while I'm nitpicking. Second, I'm on version 5.1 of the firmware, so if you're watching this after March of 2026, firmware version 6 should be out by then, and maybe a little fixed a couple of these things. But first off, let's talk about white balance. The white balance procedure on the FX6 is fairly straightforward and can be done accurately with a couple of caveats. So to give you an idea of what the conditions that we've got going are here, right now I've got the camera set to a ridiculously low 2400 Kelvin. My key light is set to 5700 Kelvin. And then in my little office here, I've got the Philips Hue lights that are all over the place in it, set to Ruby Romance, which is one of the little presets that they have there in the system. So if I were to white balance now and do that, it's going to come out at 4587K, which is not even close to accurate. The reason that is because the manual says to do an accurate white balance, it just says fill the frame with your white card. It doesn't say how much of the frame. The collective internet opinion is it needs to be anywhere between 50 and 70%. So what I'm going to do is clear image zoom all the way in, and then zoom as far in as I can onto the gray card. Now, when I hit the white balance procedure again, I'm getting 5413K. And that's still because it is picking up some of the background spill. So if I turn off those lights and now do this again, we're going to get 5714K, which pretty much matches my key light. So the white balance on this is a little bit finicky and not as straightforward as you get with, say, like the FX3 or any of the other Alpha series of Sony cameras. So sorry about the color on that. I'm still figuring out the ins and outs of the Hollyland Pyro 5 monitor here, but you get the point. Anyway, the second thing I want to talk about is some settings not persisting across frame rate changes. Let me show you what I mean. So right now I'm in 23.98 and UHD format, and my S&Q speed is set to 60 frames per second. So now if I go in and change this to 24p, it's going to go ahead and reboot. Now the camera's back up and running in 24p, but now notice that we've been locked into DCI 4K, which is okay, right? So then we go back here, and if I look to what the S&Q frame rate is, it's dropped now to 24. So I'll reset it to 60. Go back into our project settings, and I'm going to go back. We're done with this 24p project, whatever. And now I'm going to set it back to 23.98. So the camera is going to go ahead and reboot again. And if we look at the project frame rate, you see we're back in 23.98, but it held the DCI 4K from when we went to 24p. Also, it reset the S&Q frame rate to 24. And this happens regardless of whether you switch to 24p, 29.97, what have you. It always resets the S&Q frame rate when you change those project frame rates. So it's just something to be aware of if you find yourself going back and forth between different frame rates for various projects. Lastly, I've had a couple of hardware issues with this particular camera, the first of which was the multifunction selector dial went bad. When I would roll the dial, instead of smoothly going through menu items, it would skip to the point of being completely unreliable for use. So I wound up sending it off to Video One Repair in Newbury Park, California. This is not sponsored by them. They just provided excellent customer service. They correctly diagnosed the problem. They replaced the part and said that that was most definitely a byproduct of this being one of the original cameras. The second issue I had, which is completely self-inflicted, is my MI shoe came loose. I keep putting monitors up there. I've tried using the 1/4-20s all over the frame, the handle, the cage. I keep coming back to sticking a cold shoe adapter in there so I can get the monitor out as far as possible. It's an easy fix if your MI shoe does come loose. All it requires is some precision screwdrivers. So if that is something that's happening on your FX6, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to put out a video on how to fix that. We're at a great time to be in camera world. There are so many options coming out almost on a monthly basis of new cameras with better features, great, all the things that we're asking for. So it's been a great time to be alive, whether that's Canon coming out with new stuff, Blackmagic design, even the Nikon Red partnership is starting to bear fruit. This, on the other hand, is approaching a 6-year-old design with 6-year-old hardware components. But if you're a working professional, this camera is still very, very common and very well respected. As I indicated earlier, I do location sound in the region, and for the half a dozen or so shoots that I was on this year, the Sony FX6 was by far the most common camera. In fact, speaking with DPs on those shoots, they confirmed that the FX6 dominates unscripted television production. However, if you're a film student or an indie producer or something like that, there are probably better options out there from a price to performance ratio. Again, it's something that's worth looking into and doing your research, but when we look at some of the other options out there, the low-cost ones, there's some compelling cameras that do wonderful imagery for a much lower price. So it's just something to keep in mind. None of that takes away from the fact, though, that this camera still produces beautiful images. It's well respected, it's easy to use, it's a workhorse, and it's just a fantastic all-arounder to have in your kit. So I hope you've enjoyed this kind of 5-year retrospective on FX6 ownership. I'd say like and subscribe and all that stuff, but if you've seen my channel, you know I don't put out a lot of content, so maybe I'll start picking up the pace. We'll see what happens. But until then, take care.